My name is Delinda, and at 68 years old, I never imagined my only daughter would tell me I was the source of her misery. After raising Amanda alone for 24 years, those words cut deeper than any knife. Sometimes the hardest decisions come from the deepest love. When I packed my bags and walked out of my own home, leaving her to face life without me, I wondered if I would ever see her again. Before I tell you what happened, when Amanda showed up at my door 3 months later, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe to hear more stories of family healing. I never planned to be a single mother. My husband Richard and I had our lives mapped out perfectly. We married young, bought our modest home in Portland, and I taught elementary school while he worked as an engineer. We waited until we were financially secure before having Amanda. She was our miracle baby after years of trying. When Richard died suddenly from a heart attack, Amanda was just 8 years old. One morning he was making pancakes shaped like animals, and by evening I was planning his funeral. The grief nearly swallowed me whole, but I had our daughter to think about. She needed me more than ever. Those early years after his death were a blur of exhaustion. I took on extra tutoring jobs after school and during summers to make ends meet. Our savings dwindled quickly, but I was determined to keep our home in the good school district Richard and I had chosen together. Some nights I would fall asleep grading papers at the kitchen table only to be woken by Amanda placing a blanket around my shoulders. During those first few years, Amanda was my rock in many ways. She was a sweet, thoughtful child who seemed to understand that we were a team now. She would leave little notes in my lunchbox with drawings of hearts and the words, "I love you, Mommy." On the anniversary of Richard's death each year, she would make me breakfast just like her father used to do. I postponed retirement by 5 years to ensure I could help with her college tuition. Everything I did was with Amanda in mind. Perhaps that was part of the problem. I became so focused on being both mother and father that I might have overcompensated in ways that ultimately did her no favors. The changes started around her 15th birthday. The sweet notes stopped. The thoughtful gestures disappeared. I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion that all mothers and daughters went through rocky patches. But looking back, I see now it was more than that. Amanda began to expect things rather than appreciate them. When I worked extra hours to buy her the same designer jeans her friends wore, there was no gratitude, just a casual. Finally, when I could not afford the latest phone, there were tears and accusations about how I was ruining her social life. My attempts to maintain structure and reasonable discipline were met with increasing resistance. Simple requests like keeping her room clean or helping with dishes became major battlegrounds. She would slam doors, scream that I was controlling, that I did not understand what it was like to be a teenager today. "You never let me do anything," she would shout, despite the fact that I allowed her more freedom than most of her friends had. I tried to strike that delicate balance between rules and independence, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. By her senior year of high school, Amanda had developed a concerning pattern. When she wanted something, she would be temporarily sweet, reminiscent of her younger self. The moment she got what she wanted, the coldness would return. I became an emotional punching bag, someone she could lash out at and still count on to be there. I was not blind to this manipulation, but I made excuses. She was still grieving her father. She was under pressure at school. She was just finding herself. My sister Janet saw through it all. "You are enabling her," Delinda Janet would tell me during our weekly phone calls. "You cannot keep making excuses for her behavior. Richard would not want you to be treated this way." I knew Janet was right, but the guilt was overwhelming. Had I not done enough? Was I too strict? Not strict enough. The questions haunted me, and each time I considered taking a harder line with Amanda, I would remember that she had lost her father, and my resolve would crumble. The first major blow came when Amanda dropped out of college during her sophomore year. I had worked those extra years, saved every penny, even taken out a small loan against my retirement to ensure she could attend the state university without crippling debt. When she called to tell me she was coming home because college is just not for me, something inside me broke a little. "What about your future?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We talked about your teaching degree." "That was your dream, Mom, not mine," she said with that dismissive tone that had become so familiar. "Besides, I can make more money as a social media influencer these days." She moved back home with promises of getting a job and contributing to the household. Those promises evaporated within weeks. Instead, she slept until noon, stayed out late with friends I had never met, and treated our home like a hotel. For nearly 2 years, this became our pattern. Amanda would get a job work for a few weeks, then quit over some perceived slight from a manager or coworker. She would start college classes, then drop them because the professors were unfair. Nothing was ever her fault. The only time I heard from her during this period was when she needed money or had a problem she could not solve herself. She would swoop into my life with a crisis, accept my help, then disappear again once things were stable. Eventually, she moved out at 24 to live with a boyfriend. I was relieved, hoping that perhaps having her own place would teach her responsibility in ways I had failed to do. But within a year she was back. Relationship ended, needing a place to stay just until I get back on my feet. This cycle continued through her 20s. Another boyfriend, another apartment, another job, another failure, another return to my home. Each time the pattern repeated with slight variations. Each time I welcomed her back with hope that this would be the turning point. By the time Amanda turned 30, I was nearing my 70th birthday and should have been enjoying a peaceful retirement. Instead, I found myself with a grown daughter back in my home after yet another failed relationship, still no career to speak of, and seemingly no closer to independence than she had been at 18. The latest chapter of Amanda moving back home began like all the others. Tears on my doorstep, suitcases in hand, promises that this time will be different. Despite the weary sense of déjà vu, I welcomed her with open arms. Perhaps this truly would be the turning point. It was not. Within days, we fell back into our familiar, unhealthy patterns. The kitchen sink constantly filled with her unwashed dishes. Wet towels decorated the bathroom floor. The electric bill doubled as she left lights and electronics running around the clock. "Amanda, honey, could you please clean up after yourself in the kitchen?" I would ask, trying to keep my voice gentle and non-confrontational. "I will later, Mom. I am busy right now," she would reply, not looking up from her phone. Later never came. When I suggested she contribute to the household expenses since she was working part-time at a boutique, you would have thought I had asked her to give up a kidney. "Are you serious? You know how little they pay me," she snapped. "Besides, you have your retirement. It is not like you need my money." What Amanda failed to understand was that my fixed income was already stretched thin. The property taxes on our home had nearly doubled over the years. Medical expenses not covered by insurance ate into my savings regularly. The retirement I had carefully planned was being slowly eroded by supporting a fully grown adult who refused to support herself. Then there was her new unemployed boyfriend, Dwayne. He was at our house, constantly eating food I had bought using utilities I paid for. They would take over the living room with their video games and reality TV shows, speaking to me only when they needed something. "Mom, can you grab us some sodas while you are up?" Amanda would call from the couch, not even turning around as I walked past. Not please or thank you, just expectation. One evening, I worked up the courage to establish a boundary. "Amanda, I think we need to limit how often Dwayne is here. Perhaps 3 times a week instead of 7. The explosion that followed was disproportionate to the request. "You are just jealous that I have someone in my life. You have been alone so long you cannot stand to see me happy." This accusation stung. I had dated occasionally over the years, but chose to focus on raising Amanda rather than pursuing serious relationships. To have this sacrifice thrown in my face as a character flaw was deeply unfair. The daily conflicts began to take a physical toll. My blood pressure, normally stable, crept upward. Insomnia became my nightly companion. I found myself dreading coming home from volunteer work at the library, afraid of what mood Amanda would be in or what new drama awaited me. My sister Janet noticed the change in me during our weekly lunch dates. "You look exhausted, Delinda," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "This situation with Amanda is killing you slowly." My dear friend Grace, who had known me since our teaching days, was equally concerned. "When was the last time you did something for yourself?" she asked. "Remember how you always wanted to take that watercolor class at the community center?" I could not remember the last time I had done anything purely for my own enjoyment. My life had become a series of reactions to Amanda's needs and crises. The financial strain grew increasingly worrisome. I found myself dipping into my emergency savings to cover unexpected expenses. When my refrigerator died, I had to put the replacement on a credit card I had kept for true emergencies. Amanda never offered to help with the cost, despite using it as much as I did. There was a brief moment of hope when Amanda announced she had a job interview at an insurance company. The position offered benefits and a decent starting salary. I allowed myself to imagine her finally finding her footing, perhaps even moving into her own place again. The morning of the interview, I made her favorite breakfast and laid out a garment steamer for her to freshen up the blouse she planned to wear. She emerged from her room an hour after the interview was scheduled to begin, still in pajamas. "I decided not to go," she said, pouring herself coffee. "I researched the company online and saw some negative reviews. It would have been a toxic environment." I stood speechless, the familiar disappointment settling in my chest. Later that afternoon, I discovered that the research had happened after she had already missed the interview time because she had overslept. The incident that finally pushed me to my breaking point came unexpectedly. Richard's watch, a vintage Omega his father had given him, was one of the few keepsakes I had kept after his death. I planned to give it to Amanda on her wedding day, a piece of her father to carry forward. I kept it in my jewelry box, taking it out occasionally, when I needed to feel close to him. One evening, I opened the box to find it missing. My heart raced as I searched my bedroom, thinking perhaps I had moved it and forgotten. When I could not locate it, I approached Amanda in the living room. "Amanda, have you seen your father's watch? It is not in my jewelry box." She barely looked up from her phone. "No. Why would I take your old watch?" Something in her tone made me pause. After 32 years of motherhood, I could tell when my daughter was lying. "Amanda, this is important. That watch was your father's. If you needed money, you could have talked to me." Her expression hardened. "I do not know what you are talking about. Maybe you lost it. You have been pretty forgetful lately." This gaslighting was the final straw. My husband's precious keepsake, likely pawned for quick cash, and my daughter could not even be honest about it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The situation had moved beyond unhealthy. It had become toxic for both of us. The watch incident left a palpable tension in our home, but I tried to maintain peace by not bringing it up again. I secretly called local pawn shops, but none reported having received a vintage Omega recently. The loss was a continuous ache, but I focused on what to do about the larger problem my relationship with Amanda had become. 3 days after the watch disappeared, Amanda asked to borrow my car to meet friends for dinner. Her own car needed repairs she could not afford, which meant she had been using mine frequently. "I am sorry, Amanda, but I cannot let you take the car tonight. I have my book club meeting across town," I explained, gathering my reading materials. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you kidding me? I already told everyone I would be there. You can skip your stupid book club for one night." "This meeting is important to me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I am presenting the monthly selection. Perhaps one of your friends could pick you up. They all live on the other side of town. Why are you being so selfish?" I took a deep breath. It is not selfish to occasionally prioritize commitments that matter to me. Something in my calm refusal seemed to trigger a deeper rage in Amanda. Her face flushed as years of resentment came pouring out. "You know what? This is exactly why my life is such a mess. You are why I am miserable," she shouted, her voice rising with each word. "You have always held me back. You never supported my dreams. You wanted me to be this perfect little clone of you instead of my own person." I stood stunned as she continued her verbal assault. "I wish Dad had lived instead of you. He would have actually helped me succeed instead of making me feel guilty all the time. I wish you were not my mom." The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. In that moment, I felt something inside me crack, a foundation I had been standing on for decades, finally giving way. "Is that really how you feel?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Amanda spat, too committed to her anger to see the pain she had caused. "You have ruined my life with your controlling, judgmental attitude. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you." She stormed out of the room, slamming her bedroom door so hard that the family photos on the hallway wall rattled. I stood motionless in the living room, her words echoing in my mind. I missed my book club meeting that night. Instead, I sat in the darkened kitchen, turning over every year of our relationship, searching for where things had gone so wrong. Had I truly been the controlling mother she described? Had my attempts to guide her been interpreted as judgment? Was I really the source of her inability to build a stable, independent life? Sleep eluded me as these questions circled endlessly. By morning, my eyes were swollen from crying, but a strange clarity had begun to emerge through the pain. I called in sick to my volunteer shift and made an appointment with Dr. Williams, the therapist I had been seeing sporadically since Richard's death. "Delinda, you have mentioned these patterns in Amanda's behavior during several of our sessions," Dr. Williams said after I recounted the previous night's confrontation. "What feels different about this incident?" Her words felt final somehow, I said, twisting a tissue in my hands. "Like she has been carrying this narrative about me being the villain in her life for so long that it has become her truth." Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you believe is your truth?" The question hung in the air as I considered it carefully. I believe I have done my best as her mother. I have made mistakes, certainly, but I also believe I have enabled her in ways that have prevented her from developing resilience and responsibility. "That sounds like an important insight," Dr. Williams said. "What do you think would happen if Amanda had to face the consequences of her choices without you there to buffer them?" "She would struggle," I admitted, "but maybe she would also grow." We discussed the concept of radical boundaries, something I had never seriously considered before. The idea of stepping back completely from my role as Amanda's safety net was terrifying. Yet as we talked, I began to see how our current dynamic was harming both of us. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to let them face the reality of their choices," Dr. Williams suggested gently. "It does not mean you stop loving her. It means you love her enough to believe she is capable of standing on her own." I left that session with a profound sense of both grief and possibility. On the drive home, I pulled into a parking lot and called my sister Janet. "She said she wishes I was not her mother," I said, as soon as Janet answered. Janet's outrage was immediate. "That is completely unacceptable, Delinda. After everything you have sacrificed for that girl." "I think I need to do something drastic," I continued. "I am considering moving out, letting her stay in the house for a while on her own." A moment of silence followed. "Are you sure that is what you want to do?" Janet finally asked. "I am not sure of anything anymore," I admitted, "but I know we cannot continue like this. She needs to learn that her actions have consequences, and I need to stop being her emotional punching bag." That night, Amanda and I moved carefully around each other, the weight of her words still hanging between us. She made no apology, instead acting as if our argument had never happened. This was our pattern after conflicts, a mutual pretending that allowed resentments to build beneath the surface. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, a painful epiphany crystallized in my mind. By always being there to catch Amanda when she fell by absorbing her anger and making excuses for her behavior, I was not helping her. I was preventing her from becoming the capable adult I knew she could be. The realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. For years I had been trapped in a cycle of guilt and obligation that served neither of us. Perhaps the most motherly thing I could do now was to step back and let my daughter find her own strength. The next morning I woke with a clarity I had not felt in years. The decision I needed to make was painful but necessary. I would leave Amanda to stand on her own, not out of anger or punishment, but out of a profound belief that she needed this opportunity to discover her own resilience. As I made coffee, I noticed Amanda watching me cautiously from the doorway, perhaps sensing the shift in me. For the first time in years, I felt like the parent again making a difficult choice out of love rather than fear. Once I made the decision to leave, I approached it with the same careful planning I had applied to every major change in my life. This would not be an impulsive exit born of anger, but a thoughtful separation designed to give Amanda the best chance at growth. My first step was finding somewhere to live. I spent lunch breaks exploring apartment listings, eventually finding a small one-bedroom unit in a seniors community across town. The rent would stretch my budget, but it included utilities and access to community activities that appealed to me. Next came the financial arrangements. I met with my bank advisor to set up automatic payments for the mortgage utilities and other household expenses for 3 months. This would give Amanda a cushioned transition period to figure out her next steps without the immediate pressure of being homeless. "You are not legally obligated to do this," my advisor reminded me gently. "I know," I replied, "but I want to give her a fair chance. 3 months seems reasonable for her to find a job and either take over the payments or make other arrangements." In the evenings, while Amanda was out with friends, I began quietly packing essential belongings. Each item I placed in boxes represented a choice about what I truly needed versus what I could leave behind. The silver frame containing a photo of Richard holding newborn Amanda stayed on my nightstand until the very end. The morning I planned to leave Amanda had already gone out for the day. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote her a letter, choosing my words carefully to express love rather than disappointment. Dear Amanda, by the time you read this, I will have moved out. I want you to know that this decision comes from love, not anger. You said I am the reason for your unhappiness, and perhaps there is some truth in that. We have developed patterns together that are not healthy for either of us. I have arranged for all household bills to be covered for the next 3 months. After that, you will need to take over the payments or make other living arrangements. I believe you are capable of far more than you have allowed yourself to achieve, and I hope this opportunity helps you discover your own strength. The refrigerator is stocked, and I have left information about the household accounts on the desk. I will not be answering calls or messages for a while. We both need space to reflect and grow. I will always be your mother, and I will always love you. But sometimes love means stepping back. Mom. I placed the letter prominently on the kitchen counter, weighed down by the spare house key I would no longer need. As I did a final walkthrough of the home I had lived in for over 40 years, memories flooded each room. Richard carrying Amanda on his shoulders through the living room, teaching Amanda to bake cookies in the kitchen, reading bedtime stories in her childhood bedroom. The last items in my suitcase were photo albums I could not bear to leave behind. As I slipped them into my bag, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Would this help Amanda, or would she see it only as abandonment? I reminded myself of Dr. Williams' words. Sometimes growth can only happen when we are uncomfortable enough to change. Walking out the front door with my 2 suitcases felt surreal, like I was leaving for a vacation rather than permanently altering our relationship. I placed them in my car, took a deep breath, and drove away from the only home Amanda had ever known. Moving into the apartment took less than an hour. My few belongings looked almost lost in the small but tidy space. I made the bed with new sheets, arranged my books on the provided shelves, and placed Richard's photo on the bedside table. Then I sat in the unfamiliar silence, feeling both lighter and heavier simultaneously. The first call from Amanda came within hours of her discovering the letter. I watched my phone light up with her name, but resisted the overwhelming urge to answer. 5 more calls followed in quick succession, then a flurry of text messages ranging from confused to angry. What is going on? Is this a joke? You cannot just leave your own house. That is insane. Fine. Leave. See if I care. This is exactly what I was talking about. Mom, please call me back. I do not understand. Each message was harder to ignore than the last, especially as they transitioned from anger to what sounded like genuine distress. But I reminded myself that this pattern of pulling me back in with vulnerability was exactly what we needed to break. My sister Janet came over that evening with dinner and moral support. "How are you holding up?" she asked, setting up containers of homemade soup and bread on my small dining table. "It feels wrong," and right at the same time I admitted, like setting a broken bone. It hurts terribly, but is necessary for healing. Janet had been skeptical of my plan initially, but now seemed to understand the necessity of it. "Amanda called me, wanted to know where you were." "What did you tell her?" "That you were safe, and this was something you needed to do." She did not like that answer. Janet smiled ruefully. She has spent so many years being the center of both our worlds. This is the first time she is experiencing the consequences of pushing people away. My friend Grace visited the next day, bringing a potted plant to brighten the apartment. "This place has potential," she said, looking around. "Once you add some color and make it yours." The idea of making this apartment mine felt strange. For so long, every space I occupied had been primarily about accommodating Amanda. Now I was free to arrange furniture, however. I wanted to decorate based solely on my own preferences, to play classical music without complaints from down the hall. I established new routines to fill my days: morning walks around the community grounds, afternoons at the library, or volunteering at the elementary school reading program. Evenings learning to cook smaller portions for one, instead of always planning for leftovers Amanda might or might not eat. My phone continued to light up with Amanda's messages, though with decreasing frequency as days passed. After 2 weeks, they stopped altogether, replaced by what our neighbors reported was a continuous stream of friends coming and going from the house. There was quite a party there last weekend, Mrs. Peterson informed me when I ran into her at the grocery store. Lots of cars, music, until the early hours. I thought you should know. I thanked her for the information, but resisted the urge to drive by the house or call Amanda. This was part of the process. She was testing boundaries, seeing if her behavior would draw me back. Years of parenting books suddenly made sense in a new way now that I was watching from a distance. The silence from Amanda lasted 3 weeks. I found myself checking my phone less frequently, focusing instead on the small pleasures of my new life. The community center offered an art class I had always wanted to take. I started a small container garden on my patio. I reconnected with former colleagues for monthly lunch dates. My blood pressure began to improve. The constant tension headaches receded. Friends commented that I looked younger, more relaxed. Janet noted that I was laughing more easily, something I had not done genuinely in years. "You know what this reminds me of," she said during one of our weekly dinners. "It is like when Dad finally quit smoking. He was miserable for weeks, but then suddenly looked 10 years younger." "Are you comparing my relationship with Amanda to nicotine addiction?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Janet shrugged. "If the patch fits. You were addicted to taking care of her, and she was addicted to letting you." As harsh as the comparison seemed, I could not deny the truth in it. There had been a certain familiar comfort in our dysfunctional dynamic, unhealthy as it was. Around the 6-week mark, I received a text message from Amanda that differed from her earlier communications. "The garbage disposal is broken. How do I fix it?" It was not an apology or a reconciliation attempt, just a practical question. Progress of a sort. I responded with instructions for the reset button and the name of the plumber we had used in the past. Her only reply was thanks. Small updates trickled in from various sources. My neighbor mentioned seeing Amanda leaving the house in business attire. The mail carrier redirected a letter mentioning he had seen Amanda bringing in groceries. These mundane activities were actually significant milestones for someone who had relied on me to handle the practical aspects of daily life for so long. As the 3-month mark approached, I wondered what would happen when the financial support ended. Would Amanda have prepared for this deadline, or would it catch her by surprise, despite my clear explanation in the letter? I had resolved not to extend the arrangement no matter what. The purpose of this separation was for Amanda to develop independence, and continually moving the finish line would only undermine that goal. My birthday passed during this time with no acknowledgement from Amanda. It stung more than I wanted to admit. For all her flaws, she had never forgotten my birthday before. I spent the day with Janet and Grace, who took me to dinner at my favorite restaurant. Their kindness helped fill some of the emptiness, but a mother-shaped hole remained in my heart. Just when I had resigned myself to the possibility that this estrangement might be permanent, everything changed with an unexpected knock on my door. Life in my small apartment developed its own rhythm as weeks passed. The initial strangeness of living alone gave way to a comforting sense of order and peace. My space remained exactly as I left it. The dishes I washed stayed clean in the cabinet. The leftovers I placed in the refrigerator remained untouched until I chose to eat them. These small constants might seem trivial to someone who had not lived with chaos for years, but to me they represented a new kind of freedom. I could plan my days without anticipating disruption. I could leave my reading glasses on the side table and find them in the same spot later. The senior community offered activities I had never had time to explore. I joined a book club that met weekly in the common room, finding myself engaged in literary discussions that stimulated my mind in ways I had missed since retiring from teaching. One Tuesday morning, I discovered a Tai Chi class in the courtyard and surprised myself by joining in my body, remembering its capacity for grace despite my age. "You have a natural sense of balance," the instructor commented after class. "Have you done this before?" "No," I replied, "but I have spent a lifetime finding balance in other ways." This physical activity became part of my routine, along with morning walks around the community pond. I found myself sleeping better, waking refreshed instead of anxious. The constant knot that had lived between my shoulder blades for years began to loosen. Despite these positive changes, I struggled with waves of guilt and second-guessing. Had I abandoned my only child when she needed me? Was I being selfish pursuing my own happiness while she faced challenges alone? During one particularly difficult evening, I called Dr. Williams for a phone session. "It is normal to question a decision that goes against your nurturing instincts," she assured me. "But ask yourself, were your previous patterns of support actually helping Amanda grow, or were they keeping her dependent?" I knew the answer. Years of evidence had shown that my constant rescuing had only enabled Amanda to avoid taking responsibility for her life. Still, maternal instinct ran deep. "The hardest part of parenting," Dr. Williams continued, "is recognizing when stepping back is the most loving action you can take." Updates about Amanda came through various channels. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, called occasionally with observations. "Your daughter was mowing the lawn yesterday," she reported during one call, surprise evident in her voice. "First time I have seen that happen when you were not the one doing it." This small act of home maintenance might seem insignificant to most, but it represented a seismic shift for Amanda, who had always considered household upkeep your thing, Mom. A more concerning report came from another neighbor who mentioned seeing numerous cars parked outside the house on weekends, music and voices, carrying late into the night. "I almost called the police during the last one," Mr. Garcia told me when we ran into each other at the pharmacy. "But I figured she is going through something with you being gone." This news tested my resolve to maintain distance. My immediate instinct was to drive over and intervene to protect both Amanda and our home from potential damage. Instead, I thanked Mr. Garcia for the information and reminded myself that Amanda needed to experience the natural consequences of her choices. Those consequences arrived sooner than expected. 6 weeks after I moved out, I received a call from Amanda. I nearly let it go to voicemail, maintaining the boundary I had established, but something told me to answer. "Hello," I said, my heart racing. "Mom." Her voice sounded different, subdued. "The electricity got shut off today." I took a deep breath before responding. "I see. What happened with the payment?" "I thought it was covered in the arrangement you made. But apparently that was just for 3 months, and they bill in advance." Her tone lacked the accusatory edge I had come to expect. I did not budget for it. This was a critical moment. My instinct screamed to solve the problem for her to call the utility company and restore her comfort. Instead, I asked, "What are you planning to do?" The silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "I called my boss and asked for extra shifts this week. They said yes. I should have enough to pay the bill by Friday." Pride swelled unexpectedly in my chest. "That sounds like a good plan." "Yeah. Well," she paused, "I just wanted you to know I am handling it." After we hung up, I sat holding my silent phone, tears streaming down my face. They were not tears of sadness, but of a complicated mixture of hope and grief. My daughter was taking steps toward responsibility, but the path was clearly difficult. I threw myself into building a life that was distinctly my own, something I had not had since before Amanda was born. I signed up for the art class I had always wanted to take at the community college, discovering a modest talent for watercolors. I volunteered at a literacy program teaching adults to read, finding purpose in using my teaching skills again. New friendships blossomed, particularly with Eleanor, another resident in my building who had raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband left. She understood my situation without judgment. My oldest son did not speak to me for 2 years after I stopped paying his rent. She confided over coffee one morning. Now he runs his own business and thanks me for teaching him to stand on his own. Her story gave me hope during moments of doubt. I also worked to repair friendships that had suffered during the years of Amanda drama. My former colleague Susan had gradually stopped inviting me to gatherings after Amanda had created a scene at her retirement party. I reached out with an apology and an invitation to lunch. "I have missed you," Susan said when we met at a small cafe downtown. "You kind of disappeared into Amanda's problems." "I did," I acknowledged. "I lost myself for a while there." We rekindled our connection, and I found myself surrounded by a circle of supportive friends who knew me as Delinda, the person, not just Amanda's mother. Small joys returned to my life. I rediscovered my love of classical music, playing Bach and Chopin in my apartment, without Amanda's complaints about depressing old people music. I read books for pleasure rather than constantly being interrupted. I took day trips to the coast with Janet, something we had not done since before Amanda's teen years. "You know what I noticed," Janet said as we walked along the beach one blustery afternoon. "You are not checking your phone every 5 minutes anymore." She was right. The constant anxiety that had accompanied my days, the expectation of crisis calls from Amanda, had gradually subsided. I was present in my own life again. Meanwhile, snippets of information about Amanda's developing independence reached me. She had taken on more hours at the boutique where she worked. The parties had stopped after a warning from the neighborhood association. She had been seen grocery shopping, doing yard work, taking out trash on the appropriate days, all activities she had previously considered beneath her notice. The owner of the local hardware store mentioned that Amanda had come in asking for advice on fixing a leaking faucet. I showed her some tutorials on YouTube, he told me, when I was buying supplies for my container garden. She seemed determined to figure it out herself. Each of these reports felt like tiny victories, confirmations that my difficult choice might actually be working. Amanda was developing the skills and resilience I had failed to foster during our years of unhealthy codependency. Around the 10-week mark, I ran into Amanda's former high school friend Bethany at the grocery store. I had coffee with Amanda last week. She volunteered after we exchanged pleasantries. She seems different. More grown up, I guess. She actually paid for both our drinks and asked about my kids instead of just talking about herself the whole time. This glimpse into Amanda's personal growth touched me deeply. The changes extended beyond practical household management to interpersonal relationships. As the 3-month deadline for financial support approached, I wondered if Amanda would reach out to discuss next steps. I had been clear in my letter that she would need to either take over the house payments or make other arrangements, but I had no idea if she had planned for this inevitability. The silence from her during this time was both encouraging and concerning. Part of me worried she was avoiding the issue, hoping I would simply extend the support rather than force a change. Another part hoped she was actually preparing making adult decisions about her future. My birthday came and went with no acknowledgement from Amanda. This hurt more than I expected. For all our difficulties, she had always remembered my birthday with at least a call or text. The absence felt significant, a sign of how completely our relationship had fractured. Janet and Grace took me to dinner at my favorite restaurant to celebrate, bringing cards and small gifts. "She will come around," Grace assured me, seeing my momentary sadness when I checked my silent phone. "This kind of growth takes time." I nodded and put my phone away, determined to enjoy the evening with the people who had chosen to be present in my life. We laughed over shared memories and made plans for a weekend trip to a nearby winery. I found myself genuinely enjoying the celebration despite the Amanda-shaped absence. The 3-month mark arrived with no communication from Amanda. I had resolved not to reach out to let her take the initiative in determining our next steps. This was perhaps the hardest test of my new boundaries, fighting against decades of maternal instinct to check on her to make sure she was okay. Janet called that evening. "Have you heard from Amanda today? Was the deadline right?" "No," I admitted. "Not a word." "Do you want me to drive by the house? Just to make sure everything looks okay." I considered the offer. It would be so easy to send Janet as my proxy to gain information without technically breaking my own rule about direct contact, but that would undermine the purpose of this separation. "No," I finally said. "She knows how to reach me if she needs to. This is her responsibility now." That night I lay awake longer than usual, wondering what was happening in the house that had been my home for 4 decades. Was Amanda packing to move somewhere more affordable? Had she found a roommate to share expenses? Had she somehow found a way to make the payments herself? Or was she simply ignoring reality, assuming I would not let the mortgage go unpaid regardless of my stated boundaries? I would learn the answer sooner than expected with a knock on my door that would change everything once again. The knock came on a rainy Thursday evening, exactly 3 months and 2 days after I had left our home. I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, when the sound echoed through my small apartment. I was not expecting visitors. Janet was at a conference in Seattle, and Grace had mentioned having dinner with her daughter that evening. Perhaps it was Eleanor from down the hall wanting to borrow a cup of sugar or share leftovers as we sometimes did. When I opened the door, Amanda stood on the threshold, rain dripping from her hair and jacket. She looked different, thinner, but somehow more substantial, if that makes sense. The makeup she usually wore was absent, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She clutched a small paper bag in her hands. For a moment we simply stared at each other, the space between us filled with 3 months of silence and years of complicated history. "Hi, Mom," she finally said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "Amanda," I replied, surprise, rendering me momentarily incapable of more words. She shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other. "Can I come in? Just for a few minutes." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Of course." She entered cautiously, looking around the apartment with curious eyes, taking in the watercolor paintings I had hung on the walls, the small bookshelf filled with novels, the potted herbs on the kitchen windowsill. This was her first glimpse of the life I had built without her. "It is nice," she offered. "Cozy." "Would you like some tea?" I asked, falling back on social niceties to bridge the awkwardness. She nodded, and I busied myself with the kettle and mugs, grateful for the familiar routine. Amanda sat at my small kitchen table, still clutching the paper bag. Water dripped from her jacket onto the floor, but I said nothing about it. When I placed a steaming mug in front of her, she wrapped her hands around it as if seeking warmth beyond the physical kind. I sat across from her with my own tea, waiting for her to speak first. "I got a promotion," she finally said, looking into her mug rather than at me. "Assistant manager at the boutique. It comes with more regular hours and a small raise." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That is wonderful news." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "I have been working there consistently since you left. No drama, no quitting this time. My boss says I have shown real commitment." Pride swelled in my chest, but I tempered my response, sensing she had more to say. "I found a roommate, too. Melissa, she works at the coffee shop next door to the boutique. She is moving in next week." Amanda traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "Between my new salary and her contribution, we can handle the mortgage and utilities." Relief and sadness mingled in my heart. Relief that she had found a solution, sadness at the confirmation that our former life together was truly over. "That sounds like a good arrangement," I said carefully. Amanda finally looked up, meeting my eyes. "I am sorry, Mom, for everything." The words I had waited years to hear hung in the air between us. There was no defiance in her expression now, no manipulation or strategic vulnerability designed to achieve some goal, just genuine remorse. "I said terrible things to you," she continued, when I did not immediately respond. "Things I cannot take back, and not just that last day, but for years." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. "When you first left, I was so angry. I threw a huge party that weekend just to prove I did not need your rules." She gave a humorless laugh, trashed the place pretty badly. "Thought it would make me feel better somehow." "Did it?" I asked. "No, just gave me a massive mess to clean up by myself." She shook her head. That was the first reality check. No one to help me pick up the pieces. Literally. I could picture it, beer cans and food containers strewn across the living room, Amanda facing the chaos alone for the first time. "Then the bills started coming due," she continued. "I had no idea how much everything cost. Electricity, water, internet, groceries. It was overwhelming." "Those things can be a shock if you have never had to handle them," I acknowledged. "I almost called you a dozen times, but something kept stopping me." She looked down again. "Pride, maybe. Or maybe I finally understood what you were trying to do." She described her gradual adjustment to independence. Learning to budget her income, figuring out how to fix minor household problems using YouTube tutorials, cooking meals instead of ordering takeout to save money, working extra shifts to cover unexpected expenses. "Remember Dwayne?" she asked. I nodded, recalling her unemployed boyfriend who had been a constant presence in our home. "He lasted about 2 weeks after you left. Disappeared when he realized I was not going to support both of us." Her expression hardened briefly. "Best favor he ever did me, honestly." As Amanda continued talking, I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She made eye contact more consistently. Her posture was straighter. She spoke with a clarity and self-awareness I had not witnessed before. "The hardest part was not having anyone to blame," she admitted. "When the washing machine overflowed, there was no one to fix it but me. When I was late for work because I overslept, there were consequences I had to face alone." Each small challenge she described represented a step in her growth, painful but necessary lessons in accountability and resilience. "I started seeing a therapist," she said, surprising me. "Amanda had always rejected my suggestions of counseling in the past. The boutique has this employee assistance program with a few free sessions. I thought, why not? It is not like things could get worse." "Has it been helpful?" I asked. "Yeah, actually. Dr. Patel helped me see some patterns. How I always looked for someone else to blame or fix things for me. How I treated you." She swallowed hard. She called it learned helplessness, said it was something we created together over time. I nodded, recognizing the term from my own therapy sessions with Dr. Williams. Anyway, Amanda continued reaching for the paper bag she had brought. "The main reason I came was to give you this." She slid the bag across the table. With trembling hands, I opened it and gasped. Inside was Richard's watch, the leather band polished, the face gleaming. "I pawned it," Amanda admitted, her voice thick with shame, "for rent money before I got the extra shifts. It was a horrible thing to do." I lifted the watch carefully, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. After my first paycheck as assistant manager, I went back to the pawn shop, but they had sold it already. Tears welled in her eyes. I tracked it through 3 different buyers before finding it. Paid almost 3 times what I originally got for it. The effort this must have taken, the dedication to making this particular wrong right, spoke volumes about her transformation. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching the watch to my chest. "This means more than you know." Amanda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I do know, Mom. That is why I had to get it back. Dad would have been so disappointed in me for taking it." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history settling around us. "I am not asking to move back in with you, Amanda," finally said, her voice steadier. "I need to stand on my own now. I get that, but I was hoping maybe we could have dinner sometimes. Start rebuilding whatever is left between us." The request was modest, appropriate. Nothing like the emotional demands of the past. It acknowledged our need for separate lives while leaving room for a new kind of relationship. "I would like that," I said. "Perhaps Sunday dinners once or twice a month." "That sounds perfect." She smiled, a genuine expression I had not seen in years. "I could cook for you sometimes. I have gotten pretty decent at pasta dishes." As our conversation drew to a close, we established clear boundaries for moving forward. Sunday dinners twice monthly. Phone calls welcome but not expected daily. Respect for each other's separate living spaces. When Amanda stood to leave, there was an awkward moment where neither of us knew quite how to say goodbye. A handshake seemed too formal, a hug perhaps presumptuous given the fragile nature of our reconciliation. Amanda solved the dilemma by gently squeezing my hand. "Thank you for being brave enough to leave," she said quietly. "I needed to fall on my face without you there to catch me." As I watched her walk to her car through the rain, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Grief for the years lost to unhealthy patterns. Pride in the woman my daughter was becoming. Hope for the relationship we might build moving forward. I closed the door and returned to my half-prepared dinner, adding Richard's watch to the windowsill while I cooked. Something had shifted fundamentally both within Amanda and between us. The road ahead would not be without its bumps, but for the first time in years I felt we were both traveling in the right direction. 6 months after Amanda showed up at my door that rainy evening, our relationship had evolved into something I never would have imagined possible. The tentative reconnection that began that night gradually transformed into a healthier bond, one built on mutual respect rather than dependency and resentment. Our twice-monthly Sunday dinners became a cherished ritual. Sometimes we met at my apartment, other times at the house, now transformed by Amanda's growing sense of ownership and responsibility. She had painted the living room a cheerful yellow, rearranged furniture, and added plants that she dutifully kept alive, all small symbols of her commitment to creating her own stable environment. "Melissa and I are splitting the cost of new kitchen appliances," she told me during one dinner in April. "The old refrigerator is on its last legs, and we found a good deal on an energy-efficient model." This kind of practical planning and cooperation with her roommate represented a level of maturity that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Amanda maintained her position as assistant manager at the boutique, receiving a performance bonus after leading a successful seasonal inventory transition. She handled her finances responsibly, even opening a small savings account. "I am putting aside a little each month," she explained. "Not much, but Dr. Patel suggested having an emergency fund so I do not panic every time something unexpected happens." The most surprising development came when Amanda began dating Thomas, a high school English teacher who shared her newfound interest in classic films. Unlike the parade of questionable boyfriends from her past, Thomas was thoughtful, employed, and treated Amanda with genuine respect. "He does not try to solve all my problems," she told me, after they had been dating for a few months. "When I talk about challenges at work, he listens and asks questions instead of jumping in with answers. It is refreshing." I maintained my own separate life as well, continuing with my art classes and volunteer work. My circle of friends expanded to include several women from my apartment community. We formed a walking group that met 3 mornings a week, combining exercise with conversation and companionship. The apartment truly became my home rather than just a temporary refuge. I hung more of my watercolor paintings, cultivated my container garden, and hosted occasional game nights for friends. This space represented not just independence, but a life rebuilt around my own needs and interests after decades of focusing primarily on Amanda. Our new relationship allowed for honest conversations that would have devolved into accusations and defensiveness in the past. During one Sunday dinner, Amanda asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Do you regret staying single after Dad died? You could have remarried, had a partner to share the burden." In the past, I might have responded with platitudes about sacrifice and maternal love. Now I felt comfortable offering a more nuanced truth. "Sometimes I do wonder about paths not taken," I admitted. "There were a few relationships that might have developed into something meaningful if I had been more open. But I made my choices consciously, and while they were not always perfect, they were mine." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think you were trying to make me feel guilty when you talked about your sacrifices. Now I understand you were just stating facts." This kind of insight would have been impossible in our previous dynamic. We were finally able to see each other as complex individuals rather than the roles we had locked each other into for so long. Even with this progress, our relationship was not without challenges. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, particularly during stressful times. When Amanda's car needed expensive repairs, I noticed her voice slipping into the familiar tone she had once used to manipulate me into solving her problems. Instead of responding with either enabling or defensiveness, I gently pointed it out. "That sounds like the old us talking. How would the new Amanda handle this situation?" She caught herself, took a breath, and shifted approaches. "You are right. I am not asking you to fix this. I just needed to vent about the timing with the holidays coming up." These moments of awareness and course correction demonstrated how far we had both come. The most profound change was in our ability to discuss problems without immediately assigning blame. When I expressed concern about a rash decision Amanda was considering at work, she listened openly instead of becoming defensive. "I might not agree with your perspective," she told me, "but I appreciate you caring enough to share it." This balance of independence and connection felt like the relationship I had always hoped to have with my adult daughter, but never knew how to create. During a particularly meaningful dinner in late autumn, Amanda surprised me with a heartfelt observation. "You know what I realized recently? When you moved out, it was the first truly selfless thing you ever did for me." I looked at her, questioningly, unsure what she meant. All those years of sacrifices, working extra jobs, postponing retirement, those things felt selfless, she clarified. But in some ways, they also kept me dependent and you feeling needed. Walking away was different. You knew I would be angry that I might never forgive you, but you did it anyway because it was what I needed, not what would make either of us feel good. Her insight brought tears to my eyes. That was the hardest decision I ever made. "I know," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Thank you for being brave enough to make it." As our meal concluded that evening, Amanda helped me clear the dishes, a domestic rhythm we had established that no longer carried the resentment of the past. "Dr. Patel asked me what I learned from all this," Amanda said, as she dried a serving bowl. "Want to know what I told her?" I nodded, curious about her perspective on our journey. I said I learned that love is not always comfortable. Sometimes it is having someone care enough to let you fail, to let you feel the consequences of your choices. She placed the bowl in the cabinet with care. And I learned that it is never too late to start over to rebuild something better than what was broken. I could not have articulated the lessons more perfectly myself. As the one-year anniversary of my departure approached, Janet organized a small gathering at her home, inviting both Amanda and my close friends to celebrate what she called the Year of Transformation. It was the first time many of them had seen Amanda and me together since the separation. "I barely recognize either of you," Grace commented, watching us interact with easy conversation rather than the tense, careful exchanges of the past. "You both seem so much more in yourselves." That observation captured the essence of our healing. We had finally disentangled our identities enough to see each other clearly, to appreciate rather than resent our differences. The journey was not one I would recommend lightly to other parents in similar situations. The pain of walking away from my child even temporarily left scars that would never completely fade. The months of silence and uncertainty tested my resolve daily. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, questioning my decision and imagining worst-case scenarios. Yet the transformation that resulted both in Amanda and in our relationship confirmed that sometimes the most loving choice is also the most difficult one. By stepping back, I had finally given my daughter the space to step up, to discover her own strength and capability. If I could share one lesson from this experience with others facing similar challenges, it would be this: sometimes our help does not actually help. Sometimes what looks like support is actually preventing growth. True love requires the courage to let go when holding on is harming both of you. Amanda and I continue to build our new relationship day by day, conscious of old patterns but no longer defined by them. We are learning to appreciate each other as the women we are rather than the roles we once played. I am not just her mother, and she is not just my daughter. We are two adults finding our way toward a connection based on choice rather than obligation. So, to those of you watching who might be struggling with similar situations, whether with children, parents, or other relationships that have become unhealthy, I would ask, what might change if you found the courage to step back? Is it possible that what feels like abandonment might actually be the door to freedom for both of you? Sometimes the most profound act of love is having faith that the other person can stand without you holding them up. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give another is the opportunity to discover their own strength. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice out of love? What helped you find the courage to do what was necessary rather than what was comfortable? Please share your experiences and subscribe if you found value in my story. Remember that healing is rarely linear, but with courage and boundaries, it is always possible. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go in your own life.